Good Yontif to everybody. Several months ago, Dan and I went to a gala for the Westchester Holocaust Education Resource Center. The evening honored two keynote speakers who were longtime friends in their activism against discrimination. One, Elisha Wiesel, the son of the famous Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, and the other, Derek Black, a self-identified son of the Klan, former heir apparent as the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. 10 years ago, this young man disavowed his family and their extremist agenda, and he became a vocal advocate of anti-racism and the fight against Jew hatred. At the end of their fascinating discussion, someone asked both speakers the following question: which faction poses a greater threat, the far left or the far right? Now, the discussion took place the night before the presidential election, so you can imagine how divided it was. And the answer from both of these individuals was really so telling. Elisha Wiesel said that the far left is particularly worrisome. In a misguided allegiance with Hamas and continued delegitimization of Israel's right to exist, this far left reduces the world into categories of oppressed versus oppressor. They use manipulative tactics to demonize Israel and Jews and employ familiar anti-Semitic tropes to do so. It's in this way that anti-Semitism becomes normalized among the educated and elite, in entertainment, in culture, in news, in academia, and in the business world. Son of the Klan, Derek Black, said the exact opposite, arguing that white supremacy is a highly organized global movement that is far more dangerous. Pundits and politicians who normalize Nazis marching in the streets and use tactics of fear and hate have fueled nationalism and revived many forms of discrimination, where they were once dismissed as fringe or just under the surface. Many now embrace and perpetuate discriminatory conspiracy theories and extremist views. There's a scene that I love in Fiddler on the Roof. Before Shabbat, Tevye the dairyman sells his milk and cheese to the townspeople, and they're talking about the woes of the world. One says, "Why should I care what's happening in the outside world? I have enough problems." Tevye responds, "You're right." But then the young idealist responds, "Nonsense, you can't close your eyes to what's happening in the world." Tevye responds, "You know, he's right." Another man challenges indignantly, "He's right and he's right? How can they both be right?" And Tevye responds, "You know, you're also right." And so in the spirit of Tevye, we ask, who is right? Is the far right worse or the far left? And the truth is both assertions are right. They are both enormously destructive. Both extremes corrode our society, divide us into tribal enemies. Whether the right on the left, a fanatical black and white way of looking at the world, hardens our hearts and minds to anyone who does not share our experience, anyone who may think differently than us. Each seeks to divide the world into rigid camps, turning neighbor into enemy. The real danger, therefore, is not right or left, but fanaticism itself, a way of thinking that dehumanizes, flattens complexity, and closes hearts and minds to the other. A month ago, our congregation took a trip to visit the Anne Frank exhibit in New York. Rushing to catch the train at Grand Central, I ran down the subway steps and was face to face with a young family, a father and a mother and a toddler. They were negotiating getting their child in stroller and gear up the stairs, and I smiled, thinking back to the time when we had little kids, that little, feeling a unique bond and instant commonality with the deeply humbling experience of new parenthood. Still smiling, I took a few more steps down the stairs, and that's when I noticed the father's t-shirt, Globalize the Intifada. I hurried past, startled, frustrated, and just very sad. For a moment, I had identified with this young family by the bond of our common human experience, but then a slogan of hate pierced through as if it was specifically directed at me, cut me to the core. Could they possibly know what globalize the Intifada really means? I know. Perhaps more than most, I know what Intifada really means. You see, my husband Dan and I lived through it. When I began cantorial school at Hebrew Union College, I spent my first year studying in Jerusalem. This is a rite of passage in the Reform movement for burgeoning rabbis and cantors, and it's usually a beautiful, meaningful experience, learning and connecting and feeling the pulse of Israel and its people. But on the eve of Rosh Hashanah 2000, the security situation shifted, and suddenly the Second Intifada began. We lived in Israel under unbearable vigilance in those years before the security barrier. I chose seats in the back of restaurants because it felt more protected from the threat of shattered glass and shrapnel. I scanned buses for suspicious behavior. I timed shopping trips to the grocery store on the least crowded market days. We used phone chains after attacks to make sure friends were still alive. In the early 2000s, random and daily attacks came in supermarkets, pizza parlors, nightclubs, cafes, and universities. A roommate, two of my classmates, was killed in one of those attacks at Hebrew University. Dan witnessed 2 suicide bombings in Jerusalem's bustling city center and has lived with post-traumatic stress disorder for close to 25 years. To this day, the scars of that fear remain embedded in our nervous systems. We cannot tolerate popping balloons or fireworks or military gun ceremonies without warning. This is our lived experience of Intifada, a terror that is sudden, chaotic, and intent on maximum harm, designed to incite fear and violence and destroy normal life. I remember early one evening I was getting ready for services when I saw a chilling news report on TV. 2 Israeli reservists had gotten lost while trying to report for duty near the West Bank town of Ramallah. The reservists were taken from their car, detained in a Palestinian Authority police station, and lynched to death by an angry mob. As a sick symbol of victory, the murderers held up a bloody hand to the cheering crowd. This was less than 13 miles from where I stood in my living room. It was a shocking day and a new low point at that point in the Intifada. That uprising would go on to claim over 1,200 innocent lives in Israel over the next 4 years. At many recent award ceremonies, last year's Oscars and this year's Emmys, some artists wore a pin with a red hand in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. We've seen that red hand before. For many Jews and Israelis, that red hand is a direct reference to the indelible memory of the murdered soldiers in 2000 and the celebration of their murder. And whether intentional or not, those who wear that symbol are too many, endorsing a history and a continued threat of fanatical violence. How quickly we harden our hearts, unwilling to engage in the perspective of another, how quickly another human being can be transformed into an enemy or a target of hatred. When empathy and mutual understanding vanishes, seeing humanity in the other is impossible. And the slow, painful work of coexistence is a place where we endeavor to meet somewhere in the middle. For the first time this week, we have seen a glimmer of hope. The US, Israel, and other Middle Eastern and European countries partnered to create a 20-step plan for peace. The plan would return all hostages and end the war in Gaza, garnering the support of many Arab and Muslim nations. Even the Palestinian Authority has intimated its cautious acceptance of this peace deal. We wait and we pray and hope that it is to be, that Hamas will agree to the end of horrific suffering. Some of the conditions of the deal represent a seismic shift. More than just the details of who will govern and who will retreat, the larger issue is one of deprogramming fanaticism. It is revolutionary and potentially game-changing, dismantling curricula that indoctrinate children to hate and ending monetary incentive to kill. In my eyes, this is the most powerful point of the agreement. The establishment of an interfaith dialogue based on the values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence to try and change the mindsets and narratives of Palestinians and Israelis by emphasizing the benefits that can be derived from peace. This is a remarkable effort to end a fanatical mindset that has reduced everything in this conflict to extremes, black and white, for or against, right or left, all good or all evil. And who are the plan's biggest detractors? Those who claim to want peace, but will not compromise. In truth, they would like this to be an eternal conflict. For many, it is no longer fashionable or tolerable to meet in the middle. We replace discussion with righteous indignation, and in its worst forms, dissent, a right that we claim to cherish and revere in democratic society, has been replaced by political violence and forced silence. Our communities are divided and our conversations are poisoned with questionable information manipulated by fear. And instead of listening, we retreat into echo chambers. We buy into conspiracy theories. We read only articles chosen for us by an algorithm, each click reinforcing and congratulating us on our hardened heart. In our ancient narrative, the Torah tells us the cost of a hardened heart. Moses, our greatest prophet, pleads to Pharaoh on behalf of the freedom of the people. He cries, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh's heart hardens. The plagues of Egypt continue, the cries of suffering rise, and Pharaoh's heart hardens. The rabbis of the Midrash explain, once a person refuses again and again to hear truth, eventually the heart becomes calcified, kaved lev, hardened permanently. What was once a choice becomes a prison. This too is our danger. When we close our ears to the other side, when we refuse to hear another's pain or truth, our hearts grow rigid. We become like Pharaoh, who eventually destroyed himself by his own arrogance, his stubbornness, and fear. His hardened heart was his greatest weakness. We too suffer when we fail to hear others and resort to silence or attack. The recent assassination of Charlie Kirk is just one horrifying example of what happens when rage replaces dialogue. Regardless of how we feel about his politics, Charlie Kirk's murder exposes a deep and pervasive cocktail of ills in our society. Among them, an enormous mental health crisis, a society lacking in real social connections and sense of common concern, an incessant stoking of fear and hatred, and a virtually limitless access to weapons of war. Our tradition warns of sinat chinam, hatred that is allowed to grow freely and fester. We confess this particular transgression tonight. We have allowed hate to fuel us. Some expressed joy when Charlie Kirk was silenced forever. But what do we lose of our own great capacity for compassion when we celebrate the death of another? And voices they're silenced across the spectrum. The recent suspension of late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel is another example of our society's erosion. We have no tolerance, and freedom of speech is threatened. Jewish tradition taught us a good example of how to disagree. Our ancient sages Hillel and Shammai, the two greatest schools of study, argued fiercely, but they still ate in each other's homes. They still married into one another's families. Most of the time, Hillel won the debate, but Hillel's rulings always followed Shammai's when they were written down. Hillel taught Shammai's teachings first, the views he opposed before his own. The Jewish way is not to silence or to strike down, but to listen intently and to oppose vocally. These fractures not only arise in the public sphere, they're also in our hearts, in our families, in our closest relationships strained by conflict. Tonight we confessed we have favored silence and distance over dialogue and confrontation. How many of us are estranged from people that we love due to bitter differences in religion, politics, or personal grievance? Can we even begin a path to reconciliation with so much hurt unresolved? We're told that Yom Kippur of all days is the time to offer forgiveness, the time to let go of the wrongs of the past. But we know most of the time it is not that simple. True forgiveness calls for accountability, a willingness of both sides to listen, to recognize responsibility in a dance of offense and blame. And when we are wounded by those we love and trust, the scars are deep and painful. Sometimes it takes time even to consider whether we can contemplate forgiveness. The Torah gives us insight in the story of Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau are twin brothers, rivals from the womb. Jacob deceives Esau, stealing his birthright and his rightful blessing. Esau vows to kill Jacob in retribution, and Jacob flees, the distance and silence persisting between them over 20 years of separation. This is not just their story, this is our story too. Many of us know this ache of estrangement, empty chairs at family gatherings, siblings we have not spoken to, the silence that grows between. We too carry this pain. I share with you from experience. It is a sorrow that few others can match. Jewish wisdom offers us gentle guidance that leads us through these low valleys. With Jacob and Esau, the Torah does not rush to heal the rift. Rather, it teaches us that some offenses take time and personal growth to reconcile. When the time for a meeting comes, Jacob wrestles with his guilt and his fear. Before he can face his brother, Esau must let go of his rage before he can offer an embrace of forgiveness. And when they finally meet, Jacob expects Esau's vengeance, but instead Esau embraces him, and they both weep. Jacob cries, looking into his brother's eyes. This is a face that he imagined would be angry and vengeful, hardened over time, but instead it is soft and full of love. Jacob says, looking into your face, my brother, I see the face of God. It's one of the most profound examples of reconciliation in our tradition. Not because the past is erased, not because the betrayal is forgiven, but because for a moment, Jacob and Esau can see one another. Perhaps for the first time, not as adversaries, but as brothers. And there they find the living presence of God. Sometimes we must wait for our hearts to soften. From Jacob and Esau, we learn time and distance is not the enemy of repair. It can offer us the room to let the possibility of reconciliation grow. Whether in our nation, our communities, our families, Yom Kippur calls us to guard against the hardening of hearts. However distant it may feel, we should never give up on the hope of reconciliation. The 6 words of Shema Yisrael represent the embodiment of our faith in every generation. These words do not begin with a declaration of faith, but with the commandment to listen. Shema, hear, O Israel. Listen to the call of the divine. Listen to what is required of you. Listen to others before you speak, before you judge. Listen even when it is painful and uncomfortable. In this new year, may we all have the strength to leave the door open, the patience to allow time for healing, and the courage to listen. May we have the faith to believe that as long as we are living, it is never too late to soften our hearts. At the right time, we say, Bisha'a tova, at the right and appropriate time. Ken yehi ratzon, may it be so. Shana tova.